Hey guys, this is Eric Weingartner with Weingartner Racing. Today's video, we're trying to analyze why did this small little rectangular oval port head make less power than this bigger 317 rectangular port head. I should say this is actually a roval. They call them an oval port, but it's really a roval. It's a small oval with the rounded corners, I guess you could call it. But it's definitely smaller than that. So, and I'm talking like, we're not talking about peak power, which I'll show you that too. We're not even talking about peak torque. We're talking about low end torque as well. There was no spot in the curve where these smaller heads outperformed these bigger heads in the RPM range from 3,700 all the way to 6,500 RPM. Nowhere. So we're looking through some of the measurements. I'm going to show you some of the flow numbers to see if we can explain why that happened. Now, if you're like, well, I have a hard time seeing some of this stuff on screen, is there any way to get it? Yes. All the stuff I'm going to show you today will be in the book that's on pre-order right now. So this will have all the dyno numbers from this dyno session. You'll actually have another dyno session in there from the small block Chevy dyno mule test as well. It's going to have flow numbers as well. And that's for pre-order. And the way you do that is you go to my website, wengines.com, and on the homepage, there's a link to my online store where you can purchase other books that I've already put out with dyno information. And you can purchase t-shirts, stickers, that sort of stuff as well. Or you can become a channel member, which is also a huge deal. You can sign up for that. Also, if you buy a book, if you bought this book, because this is a special for this book, if you buy this pre-order for this book, you automatically become a channel member. But you could buy a different book and then pay another $25 on for the holiday special and become a channel member. So, and what's channel members get you? Well, for one thing, you can request a flow number for any head that I have. So if you're like, man, what is like, I don't know, a Rock E210 head flow? And I would send you the flow numbers if I have them. So I'm able to do that on those. You also get to see when I'm dynoing this, the day I'm doing it, as I'm doing it, you get dyno sheet results. So and you get to see stuff, pictures and things that most regular viewers of the channel really just don't, just because it's not worth putting out a video on some of it, but it's kind of neat to see. So anyway, let's get to it. First, let's talk about what's actually the heads are and what's been done to them. I've gone in further depth in other videos in the past, so you can look those up to see a better thing. This is just hitting some of the highlights. So the first thing is neither one of these heads now are stock as you would get them from ProMax. They're both from ProMax. And here's what's been modified. So we'll start with the 290. The 290 originally comes with a 225 valve. This now has a 2300 valve. I've also done support work, which you can see. And it's just in the bowl and the throat area. So after doing the valve job, made the bowl bigger, which we'll show you the measurements here in a second. And that's it. Nothing on this way. Nothing this way. So the short side also got reworked, which I'll show you in a second as well. But that's pretty much it on this. The 317s were a little bit different. They got milled down. So the chambers themselves got milled to 110 cc's because these from the factory are 110 cc's. These already had a 2300 intake valve, but I did redo the valve job because when you mill, it removes the valve job itself because you're moving so much. So in order to get the valves to seal, I had to do a valve job, did a 50-degree valve job. That hurt flow, which you'll get to see. And I did blend the valve job. That's why you see these marks here. That's the only work that was done to the port itself. And that's it. So right now, currently, both heads have a 110 cc chamber, 300 intake valves. That's about where it ends. Here are the measurements from each one. So I kind of did it in the wrong order, and I got to bear with me on this. This would also be in the book. I'm going to put it in it. But a big block has a long runner and a short runner. If you ever see flow numbers advertised, it's usually on the long runner because that's the better flowing one. If you look at the short runner, it actually aims it there right at the cylinder wall, while this one aims it right in the center. Anyway, here's what I mean by I did backwards. The first measurement is actually from the throat, which is right here. It's usually just past the seat in this area. Then I do from the bowl, which is just perpendicular to the valve guide. Then I do at the peak of the short side, which I can't get to, but it's right where you look in there, right where the peak is. And then the last place is the push rod, which is right here. Those measurements were taken. But when I wrote them down, I wrote them down in the wrong order. Really, it should be, this one should be the first one, then that, and that. So if we look at 290 versus 317, we're just gonna worry about the long runner first. If you look, we'll do the throat first. It has a 2.092 diameter, which is 90.9% of the valve. So you divide 2.092 by 2.3. 90.9 throat. 3.34 CSA. That's the same on 317s. So as far as throat, that didn't change. Matter of fact, it didn't change either for the short runner either. They're the same. So whether it be this one or this one, at the valve where it's actually exiting the throat, they're exactly the same for between the two heads. After that, it varies. The bowl's the next thing. Now this is right upstream from the throat, and this is where it varies. So on the 290, because I'd done some port work, as you can see, better videos previous, by the way, better lighting on that. It's now 99.4% of the valve, or 2.28 diameter. That comes up to 4.1 CSA. By the way, neither one of these did I remove the valve stem. So I know someone's going to point that out. I didn't remove that. So actually it's a little bit smaller when you take out the valve stem, because the valve's really running through there. You get the idea. You compare that to the 317s though, it's only got 95.7% bowl, which is a 3.82 CSA. So actually the 290 at the bowl is bigger on the long runner. Now let's check the short runner. Same area there, same one there. So it's still bigger on the 290. The smaller head has a bigger bowl. You might say, why did you do that? Well, it helps if I drew it like this, by the way. This is the better way to do it. This is the 290. This would be where the intake manifold goes. If we look at it, this area right here is where the short side is. When you increase that area there, it helps slow the air so they can make the turn to get in there. It actually increases CFM. So there's that. That's the reason why I did it. It was also, I usually do that anyway. But if you look at the long runner on this one, 3.82 versus 4.1, you can tell. Now, right immediately after that, we have this section called the short side, and I measured the area of that. This is where it's actually smaller. The 290 has a 3.44 CSA versus a 3.63 on the 317s, as you can tell from the drawing. So at this point, it's larger. And then we go to the push rod. 3.28 CSA for that 290 head, 3.55 CSA on the bigger head. So 3.55, 328. If you look at the short runner, just to give you an idea, this will help you a little bit better. Same situation. Right over the peak of the short side, it's actually a little bit bigger on the short runner, 3.46 on the 290 versus 3.71. So it's still bigger there. And then it's actually far bigger on the push rod slot on the 317, 3.69 to a 3.33. So I circled all the biggest points. So only on the 290s at the bowl is it bigger than the 317s. The 317s are bigger everywhere else except for the bowl and the throat, because they're tied at the throat. Now, you're like, I don't get what any of that means. What's it mean? Well, you could go to Wallace Racing Calculators, which is what I use for what I do. And you can enter in the cubic inch size of the engine. You can then enter in the max RPM you want it to make power at. And you can enter the velocity you want it to be, which I enter 585. And that will tell you the minimum CSA you actually need for the head for this. So 496, which is what this engine was on, or these heads were on. 496, turning 6,300 RPM, it needs a minimum CSA of 3 inches. We're exceeding that everywhere on both heads. So if you're looking at, well, what did the engine actually need? Well, what it did not need more of was more area, because it already had enough minimum cross-sectional area at 3 inches. So all this gave it more. Here's the next part. That's only one part of the things that the engine needs. So if you just look at clearly size, you'd be missing one piece of the puzzle. It also needs airflow. And people are like, you just stuck on airflow. No, I just showed you why that one wasn't as important as the next thing. You need to figure out how much CFM the engine actually needs. This is not my formula. I got this from Darren Morgan years ago. But you take the cubic inch size of the engine, you multiply it times the RPM, so 496 times 6,300, and you multiply that by 0.0009785 divided by 8. That tells you that the engine at 6,300, this 496 at 6,300, wants 383 CFM. That's important to know, because that's the one part that it never got, except for one head, and it just got it at above its lift point. So we were able to give it the area it needs. We weren't able to give it the CFM it needs. Here's what I mean. Let's look at the flow numbers. So here's the 290s. This is its flow number for long runner versus short runner. In case you're wondering, what are these pluses and minuses? You could pause this to see. This is how much CFM it gained from doing the port work on a long runner and short runner. Okay? Now, just to save us a little bit of time, what I did is I compared the 290 head versus the 317 as far as flow. Now, this thing only had a 630 lift hydraulic roller cam. So I compared the flow all the way up to 600 lift. And on the 290, guess what? The 290 from 0.1 in the long runner, 0.1 to 0.6, it was up 26 CFM from the 317. The 317 was down 26 CFM compared to the 290. Now, over the entire lift curve, that's from a 1/10 of an inch lift to the 1 inch of valve lift, even though we only have a 630 lift cam, the 290 was actually 2 CFM down compared to the 317 was 2 CFM up. Now, that's a long runner. Let's look at the short runner. On the short runner, the 290 was 9 CFM up till 600. And overall, on the short runner, was up 19 CFM versus the 317. So on the entire short runner, it's a win for the 290. The long runner, it's down just a little bit. So that's like very, very intriguing, correct? And you're like, oh, yeah, weird. Well, let's look at this flow numbers from the 290 or from the 317 real quick. At 700 valve lift, it actually flows 386. Remember, it needed 383. If we look at the 290 real quick, back this page up. Of course, my hands are stuck. Sorry that you're getting this. The best it ever flowed was 374. So it's about 10 CFM shy, even at 1 inch valve lift, which we're not at 1 inch valve lift, than the 317 is. The 317 hits 386. So it's, as far as peak flow, even though it's at 700 valve lift, it's closer than the 290 is to getting it. So if we're looking at CFM demand, neither one are really meeting it at 630 inch valve lift. Neither one. And the 290 is actually at 600 valve lift, closer to hitting it. On the short runner, this one's closer to hitting it. The long runner, 317 is closer to getting it. So overall. So beyond that, just something to think about. Now let's look at some of the dyno numbers. Okay, here are the dyno results. Unfortunately, I don't have an overlay. I'm going to get one printed. I printed the wrong sheets. So in other words, whenever you do the overlay where it looks something like that, it has the wrong test in it. So that was my mistake. So I'm going to give you the raw numbers to give you a better idea. And I'll zoom in so you, well, I'll get closer so you can see. And I'll also tell, so for those that have a hard time seeing things. But again, if you'll pre-order the book, these will be in there for sure. And then I will have the correct overlay. But just so you know, this intake right here that was used on this one was the Edelbrock 454O, and this is the 454R, okay? Both have the open spacer, both have 1050 CFM 4150 Pro Systems carburetor. So the only thing really that's different is the heads. Now obviously the intake's different in a somewhat way because the only thing that's really different is one's an oval port and one's for a rectangular port. Neither one are really port matched to the head, so they don't really match up anyway. But it is a difference, but it's the closest intake that's the same for each one. So really just Edelbrock 454O versus the Edelbrock 454R, but they have the different heads. So anyway, what I did to make this easier, so this is the 290. So I'm zooming in so you guys can see. If you look at the peak power, it made 702 horsepower, which is really, really good for a 243, 247 camshaft, 110 LSA, 630 lift. Hydraulic roller. This thing's about 11.2 compression though. Really, really nice piece. I mean, that's making some pretty good power. And if you look at torque, it's making peak at 639. Really, really good there. And that was with the 290. So definitely a good street engine. I mean, you could cruise this just about anywhere, and you could race and beat up on a lot of people. Very, very streetable. So it's not that other engines can't make 700 horsepower, but as far as how much vacuum this pulls and how easy this is as far as manners, it's a pretty nice combination. This is the 317s. So if you look at its peak power, it's made 712 horsepower. So peaks, it's up by 10 easy. And then if you look at the torque, because you would think the smaller runner should have to make more torque. That is incorrect. The peak torque went to 643. So the peak torque winner is the 317s. However, what I did to make things easier is, you see these dash lines here? This is when the head's in the lead. So if you see a bunch of dashes, it means this head is better than the other head. So for instance, this is the 290. When I was looking to see what points did it actually, was there any points that it beat the 317? So did the small runner ever beat the large runner throughout the RPM curve? If we look, we start to run at 3,700 RPM. For the first 300, it's not even as good as the 317. Now here, these next 300 RPM, it is, but not what you're thinking. Look at 4,000. 570.4, let's go over to the 317, 570.1. So it's not even one. You could call that a within the range of difference. And if you look at the next one's 573.6, you go over here, we're at 573.1. So for this little 3 burst here, they're virtually identical. So yes, this is edging out, but not even by 1 horsepower. This part is where it's a little bit different. So if we look, this is at 4,500 RPM, the 290 is at 609, and this one is at, let's see, 45, 603. So that one was beating by 6 horsepower there, or 6 foot-pounds of torque, I should say. But then we look at the next point, we are 614 here, and you're at 616. So it's now down to 3 horsepower difference. But anyway, through this range is between 5 and 4. But as you could tell on the 290, there are no more dashes after 5,000. And that's, by the way, you look. So remember, 637 at 50, I'm looking around here, 4,900, and we're at 635. That's 2 foot-pounds of torque. So a smaller runner flows more air in the range at the lift of the cam. It was worth 2 foot-pounds more torque, and nowhere else was it better. See all these dashes here? This is where in the 317 really just, that's it. Even though it flows less air except for at peak. So the entire curves, which I just showed you with the flow sheets, it doesn't move any more air, but it's making more power considerably. I mean, definitely you could tell there 712 to a 701. I mean, that's 10. So in this range here, only in the small range between 4,500 to 4,900, so that 400 RPM range is at 5 foot-pounds of torque better. Only 5. Nowhere else is it better. Now, this is where things get even more interesting. So that's essentially the same intake, same carb. So just for fun, because I also want to make as much peak power as possible on the dyno, both of these got changed to a Dominator. So what I did is I put on a adapter. It goes from a 4500, a Dominator carburetor, to a 4150 flange. And it's an HVH one, so it's tapered and everything. It's the best spacer I've tested. And when doing that, this 290 ended up making 720 and doing the same thing with a different intake, I have to say. The Brodix one, the 317s made 725. And this has been the chart I was showing you for that. This is that difference. So this is the best we could make each one. And trust me, we tested different intake manifolds. This was literally the best of each of the heads, and this is what you got. This is where the 317's in black, and then you could see the red lines, the 290s. There again is that little spot. You see it right here where there's a bit of a difference. But in this time, with the Dominator on, which is odd, this time the 317s were much better, when before with the 4150, these lines were reversed. So something to think about. It's just one of those weird things. And this is why I often say whenever you're watching my videos, don't ever take this as gospel, because in this scenario, this happened to work out. It is of all the things, that's why you cannot listen to everything on the internet, because when people say, well, a smaller runner makes more torque, it should make more velocity, it's going to make more torque down low. That is not always the case. Nor is a situation like this, where you're going to be able to duplicate it with something that's maybe a 468, and the results might totally be different. So don't take what I'm telling you as gospel. Take it as information that you can use that might help you. But what I do want you to get away from it is, whenever someone says on the internet, hey, smaller runner always makes more torque down low, this is proof that that's incorrect. Okay, it's just not that way. And a lot of people just pound their head because that's what they read on the internet. They never tested it. Well, I tested it. And that's why I mean to tell you. I actually thought the results would be quite different. I actually thought that when we looked at this chart, when I thought before the test, if you'd asked me to make a prediction, I thought this would be exactly reversed, where the 290 would be the black line and it would be beating it, not the 317s. Because I also, I hear things on the internet too, but I hadn't really tested it, and my gut said that. So there you go. Now, it does bring up a whole bunch of points, but why? Why did that happen? Well, honestly, I don't know. There's probably other variables that we haven't even taken into account into this. But so, for instance, like how efficient was the air moving through? What about the fuel dropout? There's a bunch of other things that really just didn't take into account. So we show the flow numbers, we show the cross-sectional areas, we see how far difference they are, how close they are to meeting what the math says it theoretically should need. And then we have the dyno results to say, this is what it actually did. Not what it needed, not what the math said, this is what it did. So anyway, hopefully that gives you something to chew on, let your brain power expand. And understand this, I do this a lot, but I'm no Superman. I make plenty of mistakes, and don't take this as gospel, because that's one of the worst things you can ever do. If you're trying to make power, take it, learn from it, use it, but it isn't the end all be all. Guys, remember, I'm no Superman. I don't port cast iron head. Please go buy some books. And also, one more thing I forgot to mention, which I'm going to, I am not going to be at PRI this year. As much as I truly, truly would like to go, I should have reserved the room and stuff a month ago. I didn't, because I was like, I could spend $1,500, because that's about what it's going to cost. When you take air flights, hotel rooms, food, and everything else for the 2 or 3 days that I might be there, it's about $1,500. It's like, should I spend $1,500 on this, or could I spend it on going to PRI to see some cool stuff, get to talk to some cool people, maybe some bigger opportunities would come forward, or I take that money and use it for more dyno mule testing? This year I chose dyno mule testing because I want to see other stuff. Because for those that are new and haven't ever been a member of my channel or haven't seen my channel before, the 540 big block Chevy is going to be built relatively quickly, and hopefully we'll be dining on that in January, and that should give us more information about this, because then maybe we'll see differences as far as the 290 versus 317, because I don't plan to modify the heads at all and see if they can, what will happen on a bigger engine with the same scenario. So anyway, again, guys, thanks for watching. You guys take care. Oh yeah, I don't port cast iron, and I don't know anybody that port cast iron.